Hi, this is Chris. Gonna roll solo today because I just wanted to try to make a couple quick points. This is the week that James Lindsay's book comes out called Race Marxism. He says it's going to be the final case that he makes that critical race theory is based in Marxism. Just going to go over a little bit of that because it's been the same case that I've been trying to make for several years too. It's kind of ridiculous that people try to say no, no, no when it's right in the writings. I'm going to show you that a little bit today. I'm going to show you a little bit how some internet arguing happens around that. But you have to stop and ask yourself why. Like, why do they want to dodge something that they already said that they are? Like, why is it so important? It's because it's just a boogeyman word, saying something's race Marxism. Why? Why can't they just own up to it? Anyway, this is the book that's coming out. There it is on sale. I've purchased it. It's arriving at my house. I'm sure there's plenty new in there because it's James's huge book and he's hit on every single subject. I've already probably read most of what he's drawing from. Not all of it, but I think it'd be pretty hard to read as much as James Lindsay's read on it. Before he ever started on this, I had read more than he had. I've known about this stuff for a long time, but he's caught up and surpassed everybody. And people sneer and snicker that, oh, he calls himself like a domain expert or the world expert on this stuff. He really is. He's read it all. I bet you anything if you sat down any critical race theorist and seen if they've read as much as he's read on the subject, I bet you he beats them. This is the book by Kimberle Crenshaw that you can draw the most from. I own this book. I've read 3/4 of this book. Some of it's just too boring to even bars through, but I've gotten through the most important different articles. Since a little while back, most of it I already knew about because you could read these same exact articles and ideas online. They give away the whole goat right here. You can get this book and just read it in the introduction. Just the introduction. You don't need the 600 pages of other theorists putting their stuff in there. Just in the introduction, they say it all. Just going to listen to a little bit of James Lindsay describing the book here. This whole entire podcast is worth listening to on New Discourses. It probably sums up the whole entire book. Most of this stuff, you can get it all summed up for you online. You don't need to purchase anything. You should get informed on this stuff, though. There's so many different instances that I can show where it caused major problems in organizations, major problems for individuals, major problems for larger entities. And I don't think it's the only problem. It's not the only problem out there. It's this style of theory. There's a lot of styles of these theories. That's one of the things that we're trying to tease out right now on Jonathan Streeter's channel. Keep your eye out for those. But critical race theory has been the soup du jour since the George Floyd riots. But it's just one of many different, as Marxists call, mass lines, the different lines of attack to decenter, dismantle, undo the oppressive capitalistic patriarchal system. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's what you're into. Maybe you agree with all of it. Fine by me, but own it. Stop the whole entire world. Presumably I'm talking to an audience of Mormons and ex-Mormons. Ex-Mormons, you're into the informed consent, aren't you? Right? Own it. Just start saying what it is. Agree with what it is.
So in this episode of the podcast, I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of what this book is about. I'll warn you, it's long. It is, in fact, over 100,000 words. It's obviously about critical race theory, both in theory and in praxis, which is to say how it is put into practice in conjunction with theory. Praxis is this like three-step process where theory inspires action, action inspires reflection, reflection inspires modification to the theory. So you can actually also say that praxis is practice with reflection, where the mirror or the speculum involved is theory. A theoretical lens, if you will, as they've said. You can think of it as a mirror. And so this book is supposed to outline what critical race theory is, where it comes from, how it works, and some stuff we can do about it. And it's not succinct because the story is long. The exciting part about this book is that I didn't believe when I started to write it. I started to write this book. I did not believe that critical race theory is race Marxism.
Okay, so that was just the intro to Critical Race Theory by James Lindsay. You can just listen to that whole entire podcast. You'll probably get the entirety that you need to know about it just from that podcast without having to buy the book. But it's worth going over, worth listening to. This was released, I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year ago. May 28th, 2021. Ryan Chapman's read enough of it, and he's going to back that up a little bit. He's going to be a bit more even-handed than James Lindsay about it, but he still points out and shows that it is Marxism. He'll point out some of the postmodernist structures of it as well. Postmodern neo-Marxism, the thing that Jordan Peterson took so much hell for saying years ago, and right when he said it, I knew what he was talking about. This is Ryan Chapman. This is a channel. You could probably just listen to this and get a better understanding of what critical race theorists say about what their beliefs are.
So to push this a step further, the analytical method that they use to look at America is called deconstruction. What that basically means here is to look at something closely in order to understand kind of hidden ways that things relate to each other. So critical race theorists want to use deconstruction and race consciousness to understand kind of hidden ways that race and racism factor into America and American life. And they want to use that process to question the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. So deconstruction using race consciousness is one part of their academic process that basically gives them the lay of the land. It tells them what the racial dynamics are in America and where racism is happening.
That's the postmodern end of these theories. Postmodern neo-Marxism, an accurate description of what these theories pepper in. It's more than pepper in. I mean, they kind of fuse the two things together.
Probably the most controversial part of critical race theory is the claim that they're Marxist. And it's true, but they're heavily adapting Marxism. So depending on how you count the adaptations, they're like third or fourth generation Marxism. And it's not my opinion, it's something that they're open about. So this basically opens up a whole new can of worms. And if you're someone that's already kind of overwhelmed and you're not entirely sure what Marxism is, and you're just trying to understand critical race theory in a basic way to make decisions about how it should affect your life, I'd say don't worry too much about it. I think Marxism is kind of a bonus way of understanding critical race.
So bonus way, because you have to get deep into the theory of Marxism, as James Lindsay did, to understand how all these different little details, like the idea of material structuralism, or even ideas like reification or alienation, there's these long, specific descriptions of those in Marxism. And you can see ways, if you read more into both theories, how it transforms each one of those ideas into a new, what later people changed into cultural Marxism, which is what happened in the Frankfurt School, which was real. And then how it got continued and used in these new modern critical theory ways. He's saying you don't need to understand it like that, which is probably true, because it takes a book as thick, it's supposedly some huge book that James put out, to understand how they really did take every little idea from all those pages of Marx, which are huge books as well, and try to fuse them in ways into their ideas nowadays. You don't need it to understand the whole concepts of what they're saying, but if you're really making the one-to-one comparison, you can spend as many words in it as James Lindsay spent. So here's his recent appearance on Glenn Beck. James himself, along with Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, said they were not at all ideologically aligned with Glenn Beck, but Glenn Beck was the person willing to listen to them. You can say, well, maybe because that aligns with Glenn Beck's motives or whatever, sure. But the deal is that James Lindsay, all he's doing is telling you the truth about what is in those books and the ideas that he's read out of those books. So here's James Lindsay's appearance on Glenn Beck. I'm going to let Glenn Beck describe a little bit James Lindsay's process of coming to the conclusion that it's race Marxism. He knows, if you listen to James Lindsay appear on Thaddeus Russell's recent podcast with him, Thaddeus Russell knows and kind of takes him to task that putting that direct title, race Marxism, with the red is really inflammatory, and it's going to be picked up by right-wing types. But I think James Lindsay is trying to scream out to the world that, hey, we've got an ideology that's seeping into everything here that is an extreme authoritarian ideology. Part of this podcast is they make the point that it's not just the critical race theorists that are using it. It's also being used by government, NGOs, corporations as a means to their ends. They're using it. Their different fascistic elements are using it. They make a good point about it. I only mention that because that's going to come up in the video after this, but let's listen to Glenn Beck describe James Lindsay just for a minute, and then just maybe a quote from the episode.
Every other form of Marxism, critical race theory is a weapon, and it is a tool that leftists use in order to convert violence and whining into power. It is driven by a contradiction, acceleration and annihilation. As faithful Marxists, critical racists want to destroy the world as we know it, and it is not hyperbole. They want to do it as quickly as possible, as part of what Lenin called accelerating the contradictions. This is how Marxists start a revolution, and for them, revolution is violent by nature. Despite what critical race Marxists will tell you, this is not a conspiracy theory. It is literally written out in books and articles written by them. And today's guest has read just about every single one of them. He comes from academia, and he realized early on that the so-called radicals, self-appointed critics of society, are pathologically narrow-minded, and they are dangerous.
These ideas are only being picked up on by right-wing institutes like the Manhattan Institute, Christopher Rufo, and Glenn Beck. It took liberal academics like Peter Boghossian or James Lindsay to kind of blow the whistle on it. And then now, as it gets sent out into the mainstream, people are picking it up and trying to describe it as, the right-wing pounces or a conspiracy theory by the right wing. It's only being picked up on by them. People who came out of liberal arts schools who didn't agree with all this or even had any idea about it, because you never hear very much from the people who would just agree with it and go along with it and turn careers out of it. But people who disagreed with it, we've known for 15 years. We've known for 15 years that this was directions. I was hand wavy about it. I was hand wavy that they'd be able to make it anywhere. And boy, was I wrong. And maybe 10 years after that, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I started saying, okay, this is a problem. And then I've only watched it grow and grow and grow and grow like a virus, like they describe themselves as a virus. Listen to James Lindsay's podcast on that, which is reading a paper, one of their own feminist papers that says these ideologies try to grow and spread like a virus.
And we must pay attention quickly. Today's guest fights back. You can find him going toe-to-toe with anonymous radicals on Twitter, and he's got a few Molotov cocktails himself. More importantly, he fights back using the secrets of academia against academia. He first made his name for himself by submitting ridiculous articles to peer-reviewed publications. If you don't know about the grievance studies affair, you have to look it up. It's hilarious and illuminating. He takes the fight to a whole new level in this new book. Race Marxism, critical race theory are almost totally useless. They either come from biased cheerleaders who present it in an unrealistically positive light, or from naive scholars who can't see the ideological forest for the philosophical trees that compose it. This book is the first comprehensive attempt at a remedy to this civilization-threatening problem, and it has been written perhaps only just in time.
Yeah.
I don't think there's truer words spoken.
Yeah, I realized that this book needed to be written last summer, and I sat down and wrote the bulk of the first draft in 10 days. I was so convinced that it needs to be said. It needs to be said now.
How close to the edge are we? Because some people would say, come on, it's not that bad.
It's that bad. We are very close to the edge, but I'm actually at a point of being somewhat cautiously optimistic now, right? So if we would have had this conversation a couple of months ago, it would have been a little bit of a darker.
Me too.
How close are we to the edge? We're falling off of it,
right?
But no, we're kind of dancing near the edge of it right now. But
and a lot of people are starting to stand up and go, wait.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if there's enough. And if they really understand what they're up against, but they're beginning to at least sense it. A lot of people are starting to go, wait, I think we're going in the wrong direction.
Right. And especially with critical race theory, particularly, I've noticed a dramatic shift. I've been speaking publicly about it for a while, and dramatic shift in the past 6 months where people are very confident and even informed enough to say, roughly what the thesis of the book is. It's Marxism. This is Marxism using race. And when people understand it's Marxism.
I want you to do this. I want you to do this podcast and talk to a parent like me who, honestly, you get so Marxism is gobbledygook.
It is.
And you read and you're like, how does this make sense to anyone? And so when you're explaining it, sometimes people are using that and you get completely lost. So talk to me as a parent. Tell me the difference between Marxism and critical race theory, or why critical race theory was as it is now. Why is it being put into our school?
Okay, so the only real difference between Marxism and critical race theory is that Marxism focuses on, centers is their word for it, economic class as that which generates inequality. That's how you're going to understand inequality. Who's in which economic class? Critical race theory does it with racial social class instead.
And Marx, when he did this, it was because of the class he thought the underclass would rise up. But America showed that no, the underclass can rise with the rising ships as well.
Right.
And so it kind of fell apart. So when did they switch to, instead of those classes, when did they switch to race?
The 1960s is the beginning. By the end of the 1970s, it was kind of a done deal. So in the 1960s, kind of the preeminent Marxist thinker of the time would have been Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse famously wrote Repressive Tolerance, an essay that says that we should tolerate everything from the left, but we should tolerate nothing from the right. We should censor the right, pre-censor the right. Don't even let them have the idea in their head.
Boy, are we living that now?
We live in that essay.
Yeah.
But he also wrote exactly what you just said, is that in a country like America, the working class ends up stabilized. The working class ends up building a better life for itself. It can work. It can get a job. You know, you put some basic worker protections and monopoly protections in place so that they can't be too exploitative. You don't get the crony problems, and capitalism works. And the working class gets stable. And he says they become a counter-revolutionary force, and that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, what we need to do is we need to look elsewhere. We need a new working class. He says this specifically, especially in a 1969 essay called Essay on Liberation. He says we need a new working class. That new working class, he says, we're going to look where? To the ghetto population. That's his words for it. He says the energy in the black ghetto population, the black nationalists, black liberation movements, that won't be easily stabilized. That's where we're going to find it. And so he ends up with a student, Angela Davis, very famous woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was James and Glenn talking about race Marxism, talking about the idea that it got changed. Well, Marxism went through a process, a dialectical process of changing from just the economic through cultural ideas, that's the Frankfurt School, up to the racial idea through the Frankfurt School, Marcuse up to Kimberle Crenshaw. In Crenshaw's book, the one that I showed at the very beginning, she describes how her initial fights about this issue were against other Marxists, the critical legal studies Marxists. She calls them vulgar Marxists. That's going to come up later. So she thinks people who just hold on to the economic class idea are vulgar Marxists. And she wanted to make sure that we need to take into account other ideas like culture or race, or even put them at the forefront of Marxism. So let's listen to this guy, David Pakman, talk about what he sees wrong with this podcast. Remember, if you listen to this whole entire podcast, half of what they warn off of is fascism. The fascism of Mussolini, as Mussolini described it, as the marriage of corporate and state. It's the marriage of those types of ideas to an all-encompassing point that they're just dominant over everything. And let's listen to this non-hack describe what he's watching here. So he's warning off of their fear-mongering, but all I hear here is fear-mongering and very little substance.
Of the 20th century. There's a lot of Mussolini in what I'm going to play for you.
Where do you hear Mussolini? Where do you hear it, David Pakman?
You hear, and what you are going to see are essentially unfounded conspiracy theories.
Unfounded conspiracy theories. It's in their very books. He's regurgitating their books.
Presented in a particular way to make you afraid and to make you want to say, we have to stop this. And the way to stop this is by discriminating against us.
They said nothing of the sort in that entire podcast. Nothing of the sort. Nothing at all of the sort. This complete hack.
It's threat inflation. This is going to end everything. It's going to end life as we know it. And really a masterclass in fascistic, authoritarian fear-mongering here from Glenn Beck and James Lindsay. And we've got a similar thing in the next segment when it comes to Dave Rubin. So let's talk about that next.
He makes, listen to this, go listen to this 9 minutes. He makes 0 points. He just stops and says, they didn't say anything there. What are they talking about? Because you cut out all the context. You cut out all the context that they're talking about the theories themselves, you super hack. So this is another little bit done by Wisecrack, which used to be a channel that I liked. I'm going to get into why I don't like it anymore after this, even though this very episode is one of the reasons, but it's not just this episode. There's more to that story. Let's listen to them come at James Lindsay. This was what, September 13th, 2021. So this is 3-4 months ago. This also includes a clip where James and Peter Boghossian had a debate with Mark Lamont Hill. And this might be one of my favorite moments on the internet, if we can get to it, where this guy is trying to describe critical race theory for us.
Finally gives up. So again, the whole point for all of these critics is that CRT, which is supposedly a dialectical Marxist critical theoretical hellstorm.
Yes, it is the dialectics of Marxists. Dialectics means putting things up against their contradictions in this Hegelian manner, taking them on and trying to revamp them and make them born new into a new synthesis of a new idea. That's the concept of take the economic Marxism, turn it on its head, make it cultural Marxism. That's done through the dialectical process. That's their magic, super smart theories.
Is being used by teachers to either make kids hate themselves or to start a revolution led by soldiers who are 3 years out from getting their learner's permit.
Oh my gosh, sneer at that. You know nothing of the Cultural Revolution, the Maoist Cultural Revolution. That's exactly what those students and kids did in the Cultural Maoist Revolution. And as I said in a podcast yesterday, what's useful about a Maoist revolution is it's a revolution that keeps all the same powers in place. It's a revolution against the people where nobody at the top gets revolutioned, but you can turn what Marx called the lumpen, what is it, like the lumpentariat or something like that, that the idiots of the culture, into your red guard. That's what Mao turned the youth into. In many cases, they killed their own teachers, and they went out and they were the army for them. They went out and they did all the street violence in the world for them. So take that stupid smear off your dumb face, knucklehead.
So here is what Kimberle Crenshaw thinks about this.
Oh, I've got this full clip.
Is there a K through 12 curriculum on critical race theory that's being taught in schools around this country?
Well, look, Joy, if it was news to most Americans that critical race theory was in K through 12, it was news to me too.
Oh, nod your head at the screen. Oh, wait a minute. I've got some clips from Kimberle Crenshaw's webpage bragging about this. Let's take a look. Kimberle Crenshaw's critical race theory is in K through 12 schools. African American Policy Forum Messaging Guide, Kimberle Crenshaw, 2021. Developed by the legal scholar who originally coined the term critical race theory and intersectionality. This messaging guide is published by the African American Policy led by Kimberle Crenshaw. She coined the term critical race theory. She's the most credible and authoritative source on critical race theory. Later in that book, critical race theory originated in law schools, but over time, professional educators and activists in a host of settings, K through 12 teachers, DEI activists, racial justice, democracy activists, among others, applied CRT to recognize and eliminate systemic racism. So that's news to you, is it, Kimberle Crenshaw? So let's get back into Captain Naughty Pants here. Nod, 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 you super smart guy.
The co-authors of one of the few books on critical race theory. I think I would know if we were being taught in K through 12.
Okay, so that's pretty clear. If it was
Oh, is it clear? Is it clear? It's pretty clear that they lie, and they're fine with lying right to screens. I'll show you another place where she lies right to the screen
being
in that same
taught
interview.
in schools, Crenshaw and her colleagues would probably be getting some great royalty checks. So by now we've established how a lot
They do get great royalty checks, you screwball.
of the philosophy being associated with CRT is either being mischaracterized or has little
Or you're lying.
to do with CRT in the first place. So let's quickly consider CRT's actual relationship with philosophy. It does build on the foundations of critical theory
Frankfurt School.
to question dominant structures and values in the American legal system. And overlapping with some of the scary Marxists, it uses an analysis of culture and dominant ideologies.
Will Kimberle Crenshaw agree with you that it's Marxist? Will she say that out loud on that same program from Joy Reid? Oh, let's take a look here. Take it away. Same interview. Interesting. I wonder why I didn't show this part. She could have helped out.
I hate to ask dumb questions, so please don't think that I'm dumb. Is critical race theory Marxism?
Oh, is that dumb? It's dumb to ask that, isn't it? look how she's worried she's dumb, because I think at that moment she doesn't know. She's like, she's pretty sure that Crenshaw's just going to refute it right here.
Look, you know what? Here's the thing, Joy. Critical race theory is not so much a thing. It's a way of looking at a thing. It's a way of looking at race. It's a way of looking at why, after so many decades, centuries actually, since the emancipation, we have patterns of inequality that are enduring. They are stubborn. And the point...
Question dodged. Let's take a look at another thing from critical race theory, an introduction from Gene Stefanchik and Richard Delgado. This is something else to go along with that other thing that Ryan Chapman already showed us earlier. You can find a lot more places where it talks about being Marxist in that book of hers that I highlighted at the beginning. But it says from the very start, University of Wisconsin, Kim Crenshaw later joined the faculty as well. This is when we all met together, all the people who were the initial founders. We were in a church. Let's see. So we gathered at the convent for 2.5 days around a table in an austere room with stained glass windows and crucifixes. Here and there, an odd place for a bunch of Marxists, and worked out a set of principles. Is it Marxism? Well, let's keep apologizing, idiot from Wisecrack.
To consider how the legal system reinforces racist and sexist ideas. And regarding the biggest enemy of angry parents up and down the phallic Florida coastline, Karl Marx, who famously said that the point of philosophy wasn't just to understand the world, but to change it, CRT is a method.
Why are you talking about all these? Well, that's praxis. Didn't James Lindsay say it's all praxis? It's all practice that you got to change the world. You got to dismantle it. You got to undo it. And we're not doing what we're doing. We're just doing what we're doing.
Method of analysis that aims to then engage in activism to correct systematic injustice in the legal system. But
systematic injustice.
Luckily for all those scared Tampa parents worried that their son Racheri was being recruited into a revolutionary cell group by their social studies teacher, CRT is focused on making the legal system way less racist and not violently overthrowing Western society. So
read more, buddy.
So CRT has a relationship with philosophy that's no different than what you might find amongst contemporary art theorists or literary critics. Also, it's not taught in schools, and no offense.
Yes, it is.
To your brilliant third grader, they probably wouldn't understand it if it was.
Just like they never got, I mean, we weren't taught in schools. We weren't taught the Civil Rights Act of 64. We were taught, I have a dream. That's not in the Civil Rights Act of 64, but that's the Civil Rights Act of 64. They're taught through praxis, the words that he just used, through praxis, through teaching programs, through ideas, through little cartoons that have the same ideas in it. It's such a dishonest dodge. But this guy doesn't even know. I guarantee he hadn't even read any of it. He's just regurgitating stuff, defenses and apologetics he's been given.
So why is everyone so mad?
Because you're an idiot.
Well, it's partially because they don't really seem to know what they're mad about. When one of the critics of CRT actually speaks to someone who knows their about CRT, critical theory, and Marxism, this happens.
This is the funniest cell phone I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so, and of course we're running out of time, but I'm going to respond just so the audience and the people who watch this on clips don't think that I don't have a response. First of all,
this is my favorite thing on the internet. My favorite thing on the internet is because Mark Lamont Hill just babbles out some of the ideas of the Marxism that used to be the vulgar Marxism and gets into how it does show through into the critical theory of Marxism, but you hear him get kind of esoteric with the language and start speaking about it. He's not wrong, but you can hear how it gets gobbledygook while you can't describe it to people through this gobbledygook. And this pinhead sits here acting like, oh, refreshing. This is such refreshing. It's so refreshing to me to hear true philosophy because I'm a true philosopher. That's refreshing to me. It's the funniest thing in the world to me.
Your counter is predicated on the idea that there's a one-to-one relationship between critical race theory and critical theory as sort of produced from the Marxist tradition, from the Frankfurt School.
There is.
Etc. When in fact, critical race theory has certainly connections to any kind of critical intellectual discourse, but it's also connected to critical legal studies, which was not committed to sort of inherit.
Yes, I'm following. I've read this stuff. Yeah.
Inheriting all of the kind of Gramscian and Marxian sort of ideas that you're talking about. And as far as sort of structures that again, you're making a connection between structures in terms of institutional structures that I was talking about, and the
Yeah, I'm nodding my head. Oh yeah, I'm getting it. I'm a guy who gets it. I get it.
particular type of structures that, say, a Saussure would be talking about in terms of structuralism. That's not actually what I was talking about. And that's not what most people are talking about when they talk about systems and structures. Again, that's a very tight correlation.
It's a breath of fresh air after everything else.
Shut up. Oh my gosh, this is such an idiot. He's going off into Saussure. He's going, I know that when I start talking about this stuff, I start getting esoteric to even say what I'm meaning. He's going off into structuralism. He's going off into Gramsci. He's going on other, so it's a breath of fresh air. He hasn't made any point yet, you knuckle.
That correlation, then sure. But it's not only that we're not accepting it, it's actually not what we're talking about. And postmodernism, again, plays upon a range of things.
He laughs at that. James Lindsay says right there, and the internet thought this was a dunk. He's dunking on Mark Lamont Hill, that he's saying to him, there's not an ounce of any of that, talking about Saussure or Gramsci, that Boghossian and Lindsay didn't follow entirely, even though he still hasn't made any point. But James Lindsay's making the point to him that says, you've done your Marxist reading, buddy. That's what he's saying. He's saying, you're kind of showing us here that you've done your stuff and you're in. You're a card-carrying member. This guy thinks it's dunk. This guy thinks, oh my gosh, he's owning me. He's owning me on this stuff. He's reiterating this stuff. He's reiterating that it's Marxist, and he's reiterating that he's just shown himself off. He's revealed himself to be one, likely.
I'm sorry?
I said, you know a lot about this, actually.
You know a lot about this, actually.
You think that's a dunk, you dumb shit? Well, you're such an idiot.
Actually. Yeah, he does. So for better...
Yeah, he does. He didn't get to any point. No point was made there. He was just floating around the concept of Gramsci and the concept of I'm not talking necessarily about structuralism. He was going to try to get to the point of saying that critical race theory is not a one-for-one for those other things. He never even got there. He was just floating around that stuff. Why he even brought up structuralism yet wasn't even fleshed out. It's not even there yet. And this guy acted like he understood that and followed it. But James Lindsay was making the point that you're showing your cards here. You're showing that you've read this stuff. Mark Lamont Hill knows what he's dodging and what he's running cover for. What Mark Lamont Hill is doing is he's running the hidden defense. He's hiding it away from this knucklehead who doesn't know anything that he's talking about. Anyway, Wisecrack used to be good. It was founded by a gent named Jarrett. This is one of my favorite episodes that he did. I'll try to show his face at the beginning there. We'll see more of him here. He's no longer at Wisecrack. Why isn't he at Wisecrack anymore? Why isn't Wisecrack good anymore? The person who created it's not there anymore. These different types of things get purchased or bought or moved out, and they move out people who create them and move in idiots like that last idiot. But let's listen to Jared talking a bit about South Park's neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, the concept of how this is moving towards a fascistic idea, where you take all these different lefty ideas, you corporatize them, and then you use those corporatized lefty ideas to start exerting power.
What the Sam hell is going on? But what's the deal with the PC plotline? One might be satisfied with the explanation that it's Trey Parker and Matt Stone taking a dump on liberal politics as they've done in the past. The two have espoused their libertarian leanings in interviews before, but they often evade a simple left-right divide. If you felt slightly lost in this connection between ads, PC culture, and gentrification, you're not alone. But find solace because we've got an idea, and it all starts with neoliberalism.
We would like to give you $26 million.
Welcome to this Wisecrack edition on the philosophy of South Park, Season 19. Part 1, PC culture, gentrification, and ads. In a nutshell, neoliberalism is an economic ideology that stresses personal freedoms and market solutions to address society's problems. Want to fix healthcare, the post office, or Chipotle? Let the market take care of it. Or as philosopher Henry Giroux puts it, the tenets of neoliberalism are 1. Consumerism is the most important duty as a citizen.
Henry Giroux, who is a Marxist pedagogist, he moved in critical pedagogy. He helped move in the ideas of Paulo Freire into the school system, the K through 12 school system. I'd look into James Lindsay's podcast on Paulo Freire and on ideas of people like it's Isaac Gottman who describes how it came through Henry Giroux and these different people, and that's how the stuff got worked into the K through 12 systems, even though they're not these college level ideas of studying it at a middle level. It's working in the ideas in different ways like you would to children.
2, individual freedoms trump public freedoms. And 3, all public social issues are addressed on a private level. Neoliberalism neatly.
So Henry Giroux is a critic of neoliberalism. That's one of the irritating things about all this stuff, and I think James Lindsay and Glenn Beck make the point that these theories are getting used by fascists. These same people are critics and should be critics of how their stuff is getting used. It's getting annexed in, as the critical theorists of the Frankfurt School might have said, capitalism tends to do to every single idea that you ever come across. Anyway, listen to that whole entire episode that they have on neoliberalism. Listen to the rest of the Glenn Beck and James Lindsay podcast and see how all these ideas are getting worked in to corporatism, and the corporatism is working itself to a place of higher status and higher capability of changing laws or changing freedoms than even the government has. But when they work hand in hand, you got a super monster.
Hey everyone, Jared.
That's Jared. He's no longer there. Here's Jared. After he got I'd say it's pushed out, but he decided to leave because of the ideology at places like in LA and at his company, which he helped found, got too overwhelming. I'd listen to this whole entire episode. It's on Unsafe Space. Just type in Unsafe Space Jared. You'll get this deprogrammed Jared Bauer. He'll describe the whole situation that happened. This is a guy who's still left-leaning. He's a vulgar liberal. He's a vulgar, maybe, I don't think he's a Marxist, but he's on the end of still believing in the economic leftism, but the wokeness drove him insane. And so he got out of there. Let's listen to a little bit of it.
There was a guy here in Austin who, I've told this anecdote before, but I was working at a shop. He starts talking to me and he says he's moving in the Bay Area. And this is a white guy. He's like, I'm moving from the Bay Area. And he says, well, there's too many white people there, you know? And I just, without a beat, I was like, oh, okay, so you're racist. And he was like, no, he thought I was going to do the thing that we're supposed to do as woke white people who put on the ideological dress code. And we're supposed to be okay with this kind of racism because it's aimed in the right way. And
yeah,
like,
and it's that presumption that you just pinpointed also is something that I can't stand. It's this thing where people come up to you and they say things that they don't think are controversial because they presume that, oh, you're a smart person, you must agree with me.
You must agree with me.
Yeah. This, I've been on the job hunt. I only recently got a job, but I've been in the job hunt for like 4 months. And another super gross thing that happens on the reg is like, obviously you're in a job interview. Somebody can't ask you, who did you vote for in the last election? Because that's illegal. But they do this weird thing where, like, at the beginning of the interview, they'll say something that's disguised as small talk. They may not be even aware that they're doing this, but they'll like say something that they're outraged about, and then they'll expect you to then, match that outrage. And if you don't, that indicates that you're one of them. So there have been plenty of times in job interviews that, like, people will say something that they're outraged about, and like they're waiting for me to say, oh, I totally agree, or something like that. Usually I try to just like dismiss it and just like move on to the next topic. That actually brings me to like the whole economic element of this, because like a lot of these people that, luckily I'm not throwing them under the bus by name, but I mean, if they're listening, they know who they are. I get it. When you move to Los Angeles, someone once described Los Angeles to me as a place that is dripping with, or like the vibe can best be described as a mix of narcissism and desperation. And I think that completely nails it, because people who move to Los Angeles to pursue entertainment, they have their entire identity is built on the fact that they're going to move to Hollywood and pursue their dreams. These are people that come from these small towns all across America. They're the most attractive or most talented 1% of their very small pond, and they're willing to do anything to fulfill this narrative of their identity as someone who's going to make it. So you find a lot of people in LA who are willing to do anything to, maintain their sense of identity as a success in the entertainment industry. So that means they'll stab friends in the back. They'll do anything. And, a lot of that comes with like, opportunism.
So maybe you'll go there and to get a job, you'll pretend like you understand Mark Lamont Hill and that you're down and you get all that stuff. But that's just the neoliberal end of making sure that you show that you have the right luxury beliefs and run defense for stuff that is stupid. It's ridiculous. It's religious. It is all religious tier. Marxism is religious tier. From the start, it's already religious tier. It's got these beliefs about how the world's going to play out, about how alchemy can be done to bring us about to this utopia. It's religious. It's religious level religion. And any Mormons listening should dodge it because you don't need another religion. Any ex-Mormons listening should dodge it because you don't need another religion.